Welcome to the Fun Astrology and Merriman Market Analyst Saturday Financial Podcast. I'm Thomas Miller. Glad you're here. This is the free weekly newsletter published every weekend on MMA Cycles.com by financial analyst and astrologer Ray Merriman, and this is from his own pen this week. Of course, the big story of the week, as captured by Thursday's Wall Street Journal, President Trump wants lower interest rates, and on Wednesday he got his wish as the Federal Open Market Committee cut the overnight rate by a quarter point. The FOMC also delivered an implicit warning about what this might mean for the economy. Mr. Trump now owns that, too. In their summary of economic projections released after this week's meeting, Fed officials anticipate 2 more 25-point rate cuts this year and another in 2026. Yet those same projections concede that inflation is proving more persistent than anticipated. And from the president's overseas trip this week from Fox Business on Friday, President Trump and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced a life-changing $350 billion tech investment plan dubbed the Tech Prosperity Deal in a press event on Thursday. Starmer said the agreement would create 15,000 jobs across the UK and invest in the development of 12 advanced nuclear reactors, the energy of which will be used to help power the needs of both sides of the Atlantic, end quote. And now the week in review from Ray Merriman. The Fed finally cut its benchmark interest rate by a quarter point out of concern about the slowing U.S. economy, even though inflation has not gone down lately. In other words, the Fed is more focused on the economy and labor market now. It is willing to allow inflation to remain above its target and maybe even climb higher, as 2 more rate cuts were projected for the remainder of 2025 and another 2 in 2026. It may become another tight balancing act between the 2 Fed mandates, but for now, investors cheered and stock indices rallied in many parts of the world, but not all. At the same time, the dollar also rose while other currencies began selling off. In Asia and the Pacific Rim, another new all-time high was notched in the Japanese Nikkei index on Friday, September 19th. However, by the close, the Nikkei was down on the day, creating a daily bearish key reversal down signal. China's SSE index soared to its highest level in 10 years on Thursday before pulling back on Friday. The Hang Seng of Hong Kong also rallied smartly last week to its highest level since July 2021. India's Nifty also had a nice rally to a new 2-month high. But Australia's ASX fell to a possible primary cycle trough on Thursday, September 18th, for a case of regional intermarket bearish divergence. In Europe, the Netherlands AEX made its weekly high on Thursday, September 18th, testing its yearly high of June 11th. But the Zurich SMI fell to a probable major cycle low on Wednesday, September 17th. The German DAX may have formed its primary cycle trough on the same day, as it then gapped up on Thursday, creating a nice bullish trigger, which oftentimes happens at the start of a new primary cycle. The London FTSE had an inside week after testing its all-time high on the prior Friday of September 12th, despite last week's visit by President Trump, in which both the UK and US signed a huge tech prosperity deal, quote-unquote. In the Americas, the Bovespa of Brazil also made a new all-time high late last week. So did several U.S. indices, including the Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P 500, and the NASDAQ. There was no divergence at these highs, but it is a powerful geocosmic critical reversal date time band of September 19th through the 22nd, plus or minus 3 days. Don't be surprised if a case of intermarket bearish divergence happens early in the new week ahead. In other markets, Bitcoin rallied to its highest price in a month, in line with our projections given at last week's special micro webinar, which information is in the newsletter at MMACycles.com. Ray says, by the way, it was a crisp webinar and one of our best ever. The webinar also covered our intermediate term outlook for gold and silver, which, as projected in our favorite outlook, had a pullback late last week prior to Mars entering Scorpio. The recording of the webinar is still available and is very relevant and highly recommended for traders of Bitcoin, gold, and silver, as each is entering highly charged reversal zones now through mid-October. Another big development may be underway in the currency markets following last week's Fed cut. The euro tested 1.20 in the futures market on September 17th, its highest price in 4 years. The U.S. presidential cycle correlation to currencies is alive and well. Now, the short-term geocosmics. Societe Generale, the Fed will help, but keep broadening. From Research and Insight on Wednesday, quoting, "The end of U.S. growth exceptionalism alongside an active Fed should allow the U.S. dollar to continue to fall." End quote. Now, Ray's comments on this very important section. This is no ordinary geocosmic period we are in. First of all, it is a solar eclipse, but not just any solar eclipse. This one is part of an important 18-year Saros cycle. As described by Adam Sommer in his recent Substack column entitled Dragon Hole, he said, "I couldn't help but notice that for both Saros 128, the lunar eclipse, and 154, the solar eclipse, there were eclipses that took place in the lead-up to important financial crisis moments, 2007, 1989, and most importantly, August of 1971. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon shocked the world by taking the dollar off the gold standard, thus ending Bretton Woods, which was the global monetary order after World War II. And ounce gold was no longer pegged to the dollar, and that was at $35 per ounce. Gold rose nearly 3,000% against the dollar in the coming decade." End quote. Adam's column is found at Cosmonosis, and that's with a Gnosis, at Substack.com. It is also linked in this week's newsletter and was mentioned last week by Puyan. Ray says, yet this time band contains more than that Adam was just mentioning. The day before the eclipse, Saturday the 20th, Venus will square Uranus. The next day, the eclipse day of Sunday through Tuesday, the Sun will be in opposition to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction around 0 degrees Aries. The eclipse itself takes place within a day of the autumnal equinox, and W.D. Gann loved equinoxes as potential reversal points. That, of course, is on Monday, September 22nd. This is also the same day Mars ingresses into Scorpio. On Wednesday, September 24th, the Sun forms a grand trine with Uranus and Pluto. And if that's not enough, there is also the challenging Mars square Pluto aspect on the same day. Every one of these is a potential reversal signal. Any one of these could indicate a disruptive event or announcement that rattles financial markets. For example, the Venus-Uranus square falls into the category of our TUMDI signal, which stands for the Trump-Uranus Market Disruption Indicator. So far, his most recent tech prosperity announcement, quote-unquote, with the United Kingdom has been anything but disruptive. U.S. and British stock indices are nearing or making all-time highs, which is also characteristic of Uranus in a hard aspect. Uranus loves to break out to new long-term cycle highs or lows that are nearby in any market. We also saw this with gold and silver last week. But in the case of stocks, important solar eclipses also can indicate highs from which markets reverse. However, we also have to consider the party crashers. These include Mars entering Scorpio, forming a waning square aspect to Pluto. Both Mars and Pluto co-rule Scorpio, and this merger is not usually a harbinger of sweet melodies of peace and calm. The last time Mars was involved in a waning square to Pluto and very close to entering Scorpio was October 6th and 7th, 2023. You may remember that was when Hamas entered Israel and slaughtered over 1,200 mostly young people enjoying an outdoor concert. It set off the current conflict still underway. This horrendous assault also started gold on a rabid tear from slightly above 1,800 to double that price today, only 2 years later. This, combined with the Saros cycle of 1971, when the dollar was taken off the gold standard, coincides with gold being a major theme in the investment world now. But it's not an aspect for welcoming world affairs. There's no assurance that the present will repeat the past with such gruesome specifics as October of 2023. Yet this period of Mars square Pluto while Mars ingresses into Scorpio, certainly doesn't suggest that one should be complacent about the possibility of an eruption of violence or a natural catastrophe either. The world is in a dangerous time band, and it would be best not to expose oneself to vulnerable situations where violence or natural calamities, such as volcanoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, or tornadoes, could erupt. As with all time bands of such geocosmic intensity, traders are advised to look for reversals in any markets that are near long-term cycle highs or lows. Those markets can either break to new highs or lows, or they could reverse suddenly. You have to pay close attention now to unexpected events and/or disruptive announcements, and be prepared for sharp price moves. This is fine if you're a trader, but it could be unnerving if you are not, or if you are an investor unsure of what the future holds for your portfolio. This dangerous time band may also bring good news to those who are flexible and willing to change their plans as a result of a sudden enlightenment, the realization of a better path ahead. If you're willing to just change something that is holding you back from your highest potential in life, go for that. Go deep into your thoughts with a willingness to transform, and avoid taking a risk you cannot afford by entering a situation you cannot control. And that's this week's newsletter from the Master, who, by the way, is writing now next year's forecast book, which will be his 50th. An amazing accomplishment. I'd like to point 3 things out in the announcements section of the newsletter. You get this on the website at MMACycles.com. Their MMTA4 program, which is Ray's soup to nuts, basically, training on how to do what he does, begins next Saturday if you'd like to check that out. Speaking of the forecast book, it is on pre-sale. This is a special price. It's the cheapest you would get it, and why not get the 50th edition of anything, much less something that can be a light unto your feet and a guide into your path for the year ahead. That's the print and ebook versions, not the audiobook. And finally, that webinar that he mentioned about Bitcoin, gold, and silver. That's all in the newsletter. MMACycles.com, the free weekly newsletter, link up at the top. Thank you. Have a wonderful eclipse. I have already the Fun Astrology weekly forecast out, which we talked about a lot of this as well. I'll see you back on Monday.